Hello, my name is Rodney Shaw. I pastor New Life Austin in Austin, Texas. And I'm going to talk today about creating a church planting network. Now, that's a pretty broad topic. It's a really big topic. And so I want to start first by talking about planting churches. We'll get to the network part of it, and that's a very important part, and ultimately is what this is about. But before we talk about establishing a network, I want to talk about actually establishing churches. And I'm sure there's a wide range of people watching this with different experiences. Some maybe church planners, some not. And sometimes it's just challenging to know where to start. And so I want to kind of just begin at the beginning and talk about church planting. First of all, I think it's very important to realize that church growth is not infinitely scalable. I want to say that again. It's very important. Church growth is not infinitely scalable. Every church has a lid. Every church has a limit to the number of people it will effectively reach. And so I think it is very important, as we talk about revival, we talk about growing a church, reaching a city, planting churches needs to be part of our strategy. No matter how gifted your church is, no matter how talented, no matter how wonderful a church you have, a single church is not going to reach an entire city of any size. And so it is very important that your philosophy of reaching the lost, particularly in your community, includes planting other churches. Now, it doesn't have to be limited to your community. Of course, churches can plant churches in other communities, and that's very important and needed, and sometimes quite long distances away. But the overall strategy for a church needs to include planting churches, overall strategy for revival. Now, I'll share some things from our church and just some personal insights and thoughts. So I don't want this to sound like it's all about me or our church, but I just want to share, for example, some things that we do, that we have done, things that may or may not work for you, but to give you a point of reference. And so let's talk about planting churches. As I mentioned, church planting needs to be a part of your vision. Our vision for revival at our church is basically threefold. Number one, we're going to grow our church as large as we can. I think that's every local church's desire. We are going to do everything we can to fill up our building, to build another building, to reach every person in our community. However, that's not enough. So the second part of our vision is we will plant as many churches as we can. Now, that's a big challenge. But if we grow our church as large as we can and plant as many churches as we can be a lot more effective at reaching our community and the surrounding communities. There's a third part of that vision, and I think these all go together, and that is we will support as many missionaries as we can. Foreign missionaries, North American missionaries, other church planters that come to our area. We want to support them because there's an attitude of outreach and an attitude of missions that is required for a church to grow. A church that thinks in very restrictive terms, a church that thinks in very protective terms, is not going to grow. I think it's a principle of the harvest. It's a principle of the kingdom. And so we have to be kingdom-minded. What can our church do to affect the kingdom? What can our church do to leave a footprint for the next generation? And so, grow our church as large as we can, plant as many churches as we can, and support as many missionaries as we can. Now, I think most people that would be inclined to watch this video are at least interested in planting churches. And so, let's talk about the specifics. Now, I'm going to hit some highlights, some summary points. We could spend a lot of time on each one of these, unpacking them farther, but we don't have time for that. You might wonder, where do we start? We have a church. We would like to start another church. We don't know what to do. We're not sure where to start. Let me just give you some basic foundational principles. Number one, it starts with casting a vision. If your church has never planted a church, or maybe you have, and maybe you're looking to plant another church and you're not sure exactly how to start, it begins with casting a vision. And that doesn't have to be really complex. Sometimes we hear this idea of casting vision, and sometimes it sounds overwhelming. It's really not that difficult. Here are some really practical ways that you can do that. For those of you who are pastors, It begins with simply preaching and teaching about our responsibility to reach our community. And as we begin to teach and preach, that burden hopefully transfers, and it should be a regular part of our preaching and teaching. And so that the church cannot be allowed to become just inwardly focused, but that we're outwardly focused. Number two, share opportunities and testimonies about soul winning. In other words, you will get out of your organization what you highlight, what you welcome, what you praise, what you reward. Those are the things that are repeatable. And so as opportunities come available for outreach, for soul winning, for evangelism, highlight those. And as testimonies come in, highlight those. For example, prison ministry, jail ministry, whatever sort of outreaches you have, highlight those. And it's sort of like giving financially. If people get a burden to give, they're going to give. And if they get a burden for missions, they're not going to stop giving to the church. They'll give more to the church. And this is the same way. As we begin to do outreach and as we begin to celebrate soul winning, and as we begin to really raise our awareness in the congregation of our responsibility to reach the lost, it will help the home church, the mother church, as well as whatever other churches we may plant. It will help the mother church become more effective and grow. One of the things that I've found very effective and very helpful, and that is the annual Christmas for Christ videos that are sent out from headquarters. I show these to our church many times on a Wednesday night, or we'll share them on our Facebook feed. There's nothing like watching the stories of those church planners. They're very good quality videos, and they're great stories. The stories are very diverse. There are typically churches of different sizes. There's churches in different locations and contexts. And so I find those to be very helpful. And again, we're just talking about casting the vision, getting the idea out there, getting the vision in front of people, helping them think and see, hey, there's a world out there. There's a big world out there. There's wonderful people doing wonderful things to reach the world out there. And as those things are in front of our people, they begin to get a burden. One of the old sayings particularly about missions, is that a burden follows exposure. A burden follows exposure. Once you're exposed to something, it's easy then to have a burden for it. If you're not exposed to it, then it's kind of challenging. It's just an intellectual thing. But once you have seen faces, and once you have seen places, and you have seen the actual environments, that is a very different thing. And so simple things like showing the Christmas for Christ videos can help seed a burden in the life of your church. I think it's also important to host missionaries, be they foreign missionaries, North American missionaries. Getting people with a burden who have answered a call in front of your people to talk about that. Those people are usually consumed with their calling. They're consumed with the task. They're excited. They're on fire. And that is contagious. It's very contagious. And so the more you can expose your people to missionaries, missionaries of all kinds, it will help create that sense of desire and that sense of burden. And of course, pray. Pray for God to open doors. Pray for God to lead you to opportunities. Pray for circumstances to unfold favorably. It takes a lot to start a new church, and many things have to come into sync together. And so pray. Just get the church praying. And you may feel like you want to start a church. You may not know exactly where. You may have some idea of where. Get the church to pray. Take the church on a prayer walk there. Draw a map. Get the place on the wall. Get the place, a picture of whatever. Get it in front of your people and just have them praying. And as you do these things, it will allow a couple of things. It will allow God an opportunity to work, and that's very important. But it will also allow your people time to think, and it will allow them time to really develop a burden for what it is that you feel like God's placing on your heart. After you've done that, of course, that's an ongoing thing, shaping the culture into a soul-winning culture and casting the vision. But if you're going to plant a church, at some point you have to identify an opportunity. And I just want to summarize 3 kinds of opportunities. Again, we could break this down more, but for the sake of time, 3 basic kinds of opportunities, I think, for planting churches. One One is organic opportunities. These are just natural things that happen. A Bible study begins to flourish. Someone comes to your church and they have a burden to start a church. You run into another church planner. They move to town. They want to start a church. Something that just naturally and organically is a church. Those situations happen. And so look for those. Something, someone just has an outreach. Someone has, like I said, a Bible study. Those sorts of things that just naturally kind of begin to grow and they get traction. They can become a church. So just organic opportunities. Another is geographic opportunities. Now here's what I encourage. You may want to start a church, but you don't know what to do. Get a map. You can do this on Google Maps, Apple Maps, whatever maps you use. Just get a map and put a drop pin on the address of your church. And if you live in a city, a metropolitan area, just go 5 miles out and all directions of your church and see where there's not a church in 5-mile radius. Go out 7 miles. Go out 10 miles. As you do that, you are identifying possible areas for a church. If you live in a smaller town, go to the next community. Go to the next city limits. Go to the next, town, wherever it may be, and find those places that don't have churches. Geographic opportunities. So if you live in a small town, you might think in terms of other towns, other cities. If you live in a city, you need to think in terms of other neighborhoods. Churches don't necessarily have to be separated by a certain number of miles. Think of it as churches being separated by population. So if you live in a metro area and it's 10 miles between you and the next church, there could literally be hundreds of thousands of people between your church and the next church. So let's say you pastor a church on the north side of a metro area and the next church is on the south side of the metro area, and it's a 25, 30-minute drive across, and there's 1 million people between you. That city needs more churches. And so don't think only in terms of miles or city limits, but think in terms of population. How many people can your church reach? So, geographic opportunities. The third opportunity is language and cultural opportunities. Now, we want to have multicultural churches. We want to have diverse churches. However, there are some communities that are limited by language, and so they need a church. They need a church in their language group. There are other communities that are perhaps concentrated in certain areas, and I guess this is also geographic as well, but we have to take church to where they are. For various reasons, they may not be able to get to our church. There are situations where some communities, for cultural reasons, they just prefer to be together. You see this in large immigrant populations from really around the world. In various cities in North America, you will see immigrant populations from all around Europe, Asia, Africa, various places. Those people have a very strong sense of clan identity. And their first sense of identity is their clan, not their church. And so you may have difficulty pulling them into the mother church because they're always going to identify with their clan. So, for example, if someone in their clan starts a church, they may be Trinitarian or not even Pentecostal, there's a good possibility they'll go to that church because of clan identity. So in those kind of cases, culture is a very strong factor, and it helps if we have churches that we can offer. So, three sort of opportunities: organic opportunities, geographic opportunities, and then I'm lumping together language and cultural opportunities. So, what opportunities are there naturally for you to start churches? What communities around you don't have churches? And what ethnic or language groups in your area don't have churches? Those are your opportunities. And of course, developing a plan. We have a lot that we could say about this. I'm going to just mention the few high points. Of course, first of all, identify an audience. I just talked about that primarily. Select a team. You really need to start a church with a team. You don't really need to just send a man and a woman out on their own to start a church. There needs to be a team. And you also need to establish a strategy. What strategy works in that location for those people with the talent that you have to start the church? So replicating the mother church ministry model may not work. The mother church is probably more established, it's more mature, it has more talent, has more staff, and so trying to replicate that ministry model may not work at all. And the community you're trying to reach may not respond to that ministry model, whereas the mother church has history, it is established, and so it has a core of members that help carry that culture. When you plant a new church, you don't have that as strongly. And so you need to adapt your church model to that new church to reach the community that you're trying to reach. So establish a strategy. So number 1, identify an audience. Number 2, select a team. Number 3, establish a strategy. And number 4, allocate resources. I can't underscore this enough. If you are going to plant a church, it's going to cost you a lot. A lot. It's going to cost money. It's going to cost time. It's going to cost you church members. It's going to cost a lot. That's the cost of starting a church. But an unfunded vision will not come to pass. Church plants have to be funded. They need dollars. They need human resources. They need the support, the guidance of the mother church. They have to have resources. And so the best thing you can do is plan in advance. Don't plant hastily. Plan in advance. A year out, maybe 2 years out. Raise the money. Recruit the staff. Get a team together to help plant that church, to launch that church. There's many ways to do that. We don't have time to get into that. But it's very important that you allocate resources. And, of course, determine a location. You have to have a location. And so, again, there are many strategies for that. Now, let's talk about creating a church planting network. We here in Austin, Texas, have many churches that have come out of our churches. We've planted many churches in the Austin metro area. And we've retained a network. Basically, we've remained in close fellowship. And so here are a few things about a church planting network. First of all, if you're going to have a network, you have to plant multiple churches. So getting that church planting, ingrained in the culture of not only the mother church, but the new church plants. Every church that is planted, plant them with the understanding in their DNA that they too will plant a church. And whether they can do it alone or whether a couple of churches come together and plant another church, if you can create in the mother church and in all the church plants a strong sense of church planting, so that it is understood that, hey guys, so the mother church plants a daughter church, but it's understood, guys, there's going to be another church coming. You need to know that. It's not just us two. There will be more churches. Creating that expectancy that we are going to continue to plant churches. That way when churches are planted, they're welcomed and they are seen as family members. They're not seen as intruders, but they're seen as part of the team. And so that communication is very, very important. It is also extremely important for the pastors especially to maintain communication. We have what we call our New Life Network, and that is a network of all the licensed ministers in our mother church and all of the pastors of the daughter works that we have sent out. We have a fairly close relationship, all of us together, and we meet periodically throughout the year. And it's assumed and understood that we'll all minister for one another and that we all trust one another, keeping that fellowship alive, keeping the communication alive. We gather several times a year for fellowship, sometimes for instruction, and maintaining that communication, because the more churches you plant, the more opportunities there are for people to move back and forth between churches. The more opportunities there are for misunderstandings. And so it's very important that the pastors maintain a very close working relationship. And I can't underscore that enough and how important that is. And so maintaining fellowship and communication, and especially among the pastors. Now, let me just, again, we're really fast forwarding for the sake of time, but let me just address church members. There's some things that a church member can do. You may be, maybe you're a church member and you've wandered across this video and you're like, wow, I want to know what I can do to help my church plant a church. Well, here's some thoughts. First of all, support the vision. If your pastor has a vision to plant churches, support that vision. It may mean you lose your best keyboard player. It may mean you lose your best Sunday school teacher. It may mean you have to make some sacrifices. Support the vision. The vision is not just about what we can experience and accomplish. The vision is ultimately about what we're leaving for a next generation. And so support the vision. Number 2, pray. Pray for your pastor, pray for your church, pray for the area, pray for the network, pray for these daughter works that are started or yet to be started. Pray for those future pastors. Cover this endeavor with prayer. Number 3, give. Give. Give your finance. Give your time. Be willing to support it. Be willing to give up a Sunday afternoon. Be willing to give up a Saturday afternoon. Give. If we are going to plant churches, we have to be willing to give. And it's going to take sacrificial giving from all of us. Number 4, be willing to go. If we are going to start churches and we're going to send teams to start churches, someone has to go. Someone has to step away from the mother church, even if only for a season. Someone has to step away, go to a storefront, go to a small building, go to a much less complicated, less sophisticated, maybe less effective ministry model to plant a church. Be willing to go. Be willing to give of yourself, your family, for the sake of starting a church. Number 5, and this is extremely important, remain faithful. A church planting network is not like a chain of coffee shops. If you want coffee and you have a favorite coffee shop chain, you go to any of them anywhere over town. It doesn't matter. You just go where you want. The way a church planting network works is that if we are going to send people, the only way we can send is that once we have identified where our home churches are, we have to remain faithful in our home churches. It doesn't mean that we don't have fellowship with other churches. It doesn't mean we don't have friends. Of course we do. But what it means is we have to have a strong loyalty to our local church. We don't just get to move between the churches as if they are a franchise. And so we go here this Sunday and there next Sunday. But you have to be loyal to your church, faithful to your church. If you feel God's calling you, if you feel a burden for another area of town, that's something to work out with your pastor. There are 3 things that we should really keep in mind, particularly with transferring from one church to another in a local setting. Number 1, what's the will of God for your life? That's something for you to determine with your pastor in prayer. Number 2, what is best and when is the best timing for the church that you're going to? A lot of times we assume that every church needs us and they will welcome us. They need help. Many times churches, particularly new churches, are in situations where they don't need transfer members. They are working with a small group of converts. They're trying to build consensus. They're trying to get traction, and they don't need transfers. And so many times the best thing that we can do is not transfer to another church. We think we're helping, but we may not be helping. So number 1, what's the will of God for your life? Number 2, what is best and what is the best timing for that church you think you should transfer to? And the third factor is what is best and what is the best timing for the church you're transferring out of. In other words, as a church member, I belong to the body of Christ. My decisions are not just about me and my family. My decisions affect the entire congregation. My decisions affect the church. Is this a good time for me to transfer my talent, treasure, and time to another church? And so I just sort of offer that as summary, but to say the way a church planting network works most effectively is when people are loyal and faithful to the church that God has placed them in, and all of the churches grow simultaneously, and we grow in our areas of town. Now, there's so much more we could say, and there's a lot that is left to be said. I hope that you have an opportunity to have conversation with this about someone. I hope that you have an opportunity to pray about this. If you're a church member, talk to your pastor. Pray with your pastor. If you're a pastor, start casting a vision. Step out by faith and see what God can do. I really believe that many churches actually can start a church planting network.